We're live.
Welcome to this event from the publishers at Light on Light Press, an imprint of Sacred Stories Publishing, and the Unitive Justice and Global Security Synergy Circle of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle. You can find out more about all of us at lightonlight.us, sacredstories.com, and evolutionaryleaders.net. This is an event celebrating the Nautilus Award for the book Global Unitive Healing, Integral Skills for Personal and Collective Transformation by Dr. Elena Mustakova, forward by Ken Wilber, afterward by Claudia Wells, and introducing the concern, engagement, and vision of the Unitive Justice and Global Security Synergy Circle of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle. I'm here with the host from the Sign Network, John Raymer, and with Dr. Elena Mustakova, the author of Global Unitive Healing, and with Dr. Robert Atkinson, a two-time Nautilus Award winner himself, and the acquisitions director at the Light on Light Press. I'm Dr. Kurt Johnson, one of the managing directors at Light on Light. We're going to be sharing with you 5 short video presentations, all concerning the state of our world right now and the implications of that in the context of our need for global unitive healing and skills for personal and collective transformation. Our guests include well-known authors, thought leaders, and activists, Audrey Kitagawa JD, Dr. Jude Currivan, Dr. Jonathan Granoff, and Dr. Scott Alan Carlin, along with the Global Unitive Healing author, Dr. Elena Mustakova. We'll be saying more about each of them as we introduce their video presentations. But I want to introduce first Dr. Robert Atkinson, who brought this book to us and was a part of the team in the development of the book. So Bob, what would you like to say about the importance of this book, Global Unitive Healing, and its relevance to this pivotal question of unitive justice and global security?
Thanks, Kurt. It's been a pleasure to be part of the team for Global Unitive Healing. As a context for what I'd like to say, one of the things this lingering pandemic has done is fully expose all the social and economic injustices we've been living with for so long. This does not even include the oceans of misinformation that are detaching millions from reality and creating deep divisions everywhere. We are living in an unprecedented dark night of the collective soul. A holistic vision is the only thing that will ensure that the process of transformation already happening will be completed in a way that is for the betterment of the whole. A holistic vision sees a purpose to these turbulent times. Though there are opposing forces, consciousness is meant to evolve toward wholeness and unity. A holistic vision prioritizes the whole, brings about cooperation and harmony, and places a unity of purpose above all else. This consciousness calls for a complete shift in how we relate to all things. A new story of wholeness is emerging. A global community built upon a culture of peace is forming. Caring for the planet itself and healing all the racial and social injustices requires a unitive, holistic effort that includes listening more deeply across differences. This is exactly what this book, Global Unitive Healing, offers: an understanding of the new spiritual language that brings the human family together as one. It adds the way of unity to what Andrew Harvey identified as the mystic ways of understanding the world's wisdom traditions by situating the Baha'i faith as the latest of those, having come forth in the mid-19th century. This initiated both a new spiritual cycle built upon the principle of the oneness of humanity and an evolutionary leap of consciousness, as we see unfolding now through the integration of Eastern and Western spiritual thought. It is with this as a foundation that Global Unitive Healing offers an integral approach to the healing of individuals and the collective. It provides an evolutionary and spiritual context for the current interspiritual age, and it makes the challenges we face in the process not only more understandable, but more meaningful. This is exactly why a focus on unitive healing is so needed, as well as a focus on unitive justice and global security. I'll say a little bit more about the vital role of unitive justice after we've heard from our other guests.
Well, Dr. Robert Atkinson, thank you so much. And now, before we share our presentations from our guests, Dr. Mustakova, what would you like to say about this book and also about the emergence of this synergy circle in the evolutionary leaders for unitive justice and global security?
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. What I'd like to say is that the times are so excruciatingly difficult for ordinary people that that's really what inspired the writing of this book. Not only are we living in the midst of a scientifically proven extinction crisis, as well as a climate crisis, in addition to all the social disparities and injustices, but what's even worse, people are so massively discouraged from thinking deeply about the reality we're living and what's really needed, that it is extremely easy right now to peddle half-truths, warped versions of history, as we're seeing happening right now in the center of Europe, as well as in Asia and many parts of the world. And cycles of ignorance are being actively fed and proliferated. So in this time, what I try to do in Global Unitive Healing is to show people how the architecture, the current architecture of separation, and I want it to be clearly heard, architecture, it is intended, is in fact keeping people steeped in fear, opposition, depression, disinformation, denial. And the idea of justice that is now perpetrated is always very partial and very oppositional. So through clinical vignettes of many lives, I show in this book how people caught in a narrow and warped view of reality always suffer, and how awakening and developing a more coherent understanding of self, of life, and social world is healing. So the book presents foundational skills and understanding which are needed, and we need them at the center of a massive educational campaign toward what unitive justice may look like at this very, very contentious time. And that is exactly the purpose of this new synergy circle of unitive justice and global security. It is to help people understand that real justice, the foundation for real justice, is developing right relationships to reality, to religion, to science, to humanity, to inner and outer human experience. So this synergy circle that we are now beginning is going to really work on a campaign to help people understand the difference between reality as consciousness and reality as these warped semi-narratives that are really rewriting history, including Stalinist history is being rewritten. And many other examples could be mentioned here, but I will stop. The times are critical and education is critical right now. And most importantly, helping ordinary people understand the direct connection between their daily suffering and their worldview and how they show up in the world.
Well, Dr. Mustakova, thank you so much. And so now we can go to our video presentations, and our first guest is Audrey Kitagawa JD. Ms. Kitagawa is founder of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation and also a previous chairperson of the Parliament of the World's Religions. You can find out much more about Ms. Kitagawa and the Academy at multiculturalcooperation.net. That's multiculturalcooperation.net. So John, let's start our presentations with this video from Audrey Kitagawa.
Hello, everyone. It's such a privilege to share about the source of synergies, Unitive Justice and Global Security Synergy Circle. There is no more important time to share about the need to come together to more deeply examine what unitive justice means and what global security means and why they are intertwined, interconnected concepts whose time has come in the evolution of human consciousness to understand and embrace them together. We may have heard of reparative justice, restorative justice, punitive justice, but unitive justice? What does unitive justice mean? Very briefly, unitive justice is based on the moral concept of loving kindness, which asserts that harming another is never a moral act. It is a values-based system of justice that is free of punitive elements and replaces judgment and punishment with the structures of inclusion, connection, and mutually beneficial action. In short, it is justice as love in action. It provides those in dissension a chance to achieve mutual understanding by returning to their shared humanity, harmony, and balance. Our shared humanity can be succinctly described in this 15th century verse written by the Sufi poet Kabir. He said, "In your veins and in mine, there is only one blood, the same life that animates us all. Since one unique Mother Earth begat us all, where did we learn to divide ourselves?" It is a return to the remembrance of the source from which we all originated to dance the dances of life on our journey together during our respective births and deaths. During this lifetime, we learn that through the application of our values, which guide our behaviors, there is already within each person that can be healed to transform conflict and lead to mutually beneficial results. Now, what is global security? First, the fundamental meaning of security is the state of being free from danger or threat. We look to the establishment of measures which can be taken to ensure the safety of a nation state and its citizens. But global relates to the whole world, so the use of the word security in the global sense compels us to look to the worldwide measures that need to be taken to keep everyone free from danger and threat, in short, from harm. It starts with the rising of the individual consciousness and our personal conduct and behaviors of mind, speech, and actions in everyday life. It then expands and connects to the community through civil discourse and interaction, and through small acts of compassion and loving kindness. Some individuals will be moved to social action, finding their voices of advocacy and activism. Others, when touched by the deep ethics and values that live within the unitive wholeness, will simply and profoundly begin to alter their thoughts, their speech, and their actions to align with their true nature. Without judgment, resentment, or expectations, these individuals will help raise the consciousness of the collective to resonate to a place of deeper understanding and love, where positive, transformative change can happen. We are well positioned to be able to do this together now, because building networks and connecting with others from all around the world collectively represents global civil society. Civil society is now poised in unprecedented ways to become a powerful agent of transformation. Civil society is the connection between the grassroots and the policymakers and can be the conduit for the exchange of thoughts, ideas, and information. They hold the court of public opinion and have been very influential in creating people's movements to bring change. Civil society organizations play multiple roles, according to author George Ingram in a paper for Brookings Institute. He said they're an important source of information for both citizens and government. They monitor government policies and actions and hold governments accountable. They engage in advocacy and offer alternative policies for government, the private sector, and other institutions. They deliver services, especially to the poor and underserved. They defend citizens' rights and work to change and uphold social norms and behaviors. But ultimately, the values and beliefs of civil society organizations arise from their connection to the people, to encourage individual self-examination, validation, and connection with inner values that will guide them and help to move through conflict with loving kindness. It is our hope that this mobilization toward loving kindness will influence our institutions of justice to re-examine historic forms of punitive justice and begin to implement unitive justice. All human beings and all religious and spiritual traditions share deep innate values and goals, such as peace, harmony, and love. As we practice loving kindness individually and collectively, and as applied in our institutions of justice, we will facilitate the reality of unitive justice and enhance true global security and well-being for people everywhere. In the truest sense of global security, it is that state of well-being, free of fear, that allows us to live together with love and kindness that causes no harm. This is peace.
Well, thank you so much, John and Audrey Kitagawa. Now, our next guest is Dr. Jude Currivan. And Dr. Currivan is a well-known cosmologist and anthropologist and formerly a senior business leader in the United Kingdom. She is well known for her book, The Cosmic Hologram, and her forthcoming book, The Story of Gaia. The founder of the Whole World View. You can learn much more about Dr. Currivan at judecurrivan.com. So John, let's continue now with the video from Dr. Jude Currivan.
Humanity as a species is at a crucial threshold. We're now well aware of the existential challenges that threaten our collective future, and the realization that our prevailing mindset of materialist separation and our consequential behaviors are the main cause of them. As Albert Einstein once said, we cannot resolve a problem from the same level of awareness and mindset that created it. And so if we're to survive and thrive, and for unitive justice and peace to prevail, we urgently need to transform our current mindset of separation and its fragmented perspective and narrative of how we see ourselves and our place in the world into one, to paraphrase Joseph Campbell, that instead is grounded in widespread unitive consciousness, which includes a felt sense of unity with all life, unity with an ineffable source of all being, and unity with the evolutionary flow. Throughout time, human beings have shared worldviews, mindsets, and narratives to try and understand the nature of the world and our place in it. We've sought to embrace and reconcile our inner and outer experiences of life and to imbue them with meaning and purpose. While universal wisdom teachings have continued to maintain that beyond the appearance of our physical world are more fundamental realms of sentience and causation, the materialist separation of our predominant mindset has peripheralized such perceptions, and for our communal psyche has resulted in a dis-ease of displacement, inequities, and to what doctors call a healing crisis. Yet, as any doctor knows, trying to deal with the symptoms without actually addressing the root cause of a dis-ease will not and cannot heal it. What though if our prevailing mindset of separation is wrong? What if we can remember the essentially unified nature of reality as maintained by wisdom traditions? And if we can, what could it mean to us and to how we treat ourselves, each other, and our planetary home? Vitally, growing evidence from scientific breakthroughs at all scales of existence and across wide-ranging fields of study are converging with time-honoured wisdom traditions to reveal that the appearance of our entire universe does indeed arise from deeper, non-physical realms of causation as meaningful information, pixelated at the most minute scale of existence. And the emergent cosmological understanding of its informed reality is that it manifests holographically, with its innate wholeness expressed in nested and relational complexity of its differentiated and diverse parts. Fundamentally, it is showing that mind and consciousness are not something we have, but rather what we and the whole world really are. Vitally, the exquisitely fine-tuned, relational and ordered nature of its beginning, not in the implied chaos of a Big Bang, but rather as the first moment of an ongoing big breath, and the evidence from its 13.8 billion year journey ever since, is now describing a universe that meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves as an entirely unified entity, existing to evolve from simplicity to complexity and diversity, ever greater levels of individuated and collective self-expression, self-awareness, and conscious interdependence and interbeing. Our planetary home, Gaia's continuing emergence, is also embodied in collaborative relationships and co-evolutionary partnerships, and where now the conscious evolution of humanity may be realized as an integral part of our planet's own evolutionary progress and purpose. This transformational understanding underpins and frames a unitive narrative of inclusion and belonging, of intrinsic meaning and purpose of the whole of existence. Such an evidence-based unitive narrative has been drafted by members of the SDG Thought Leaders Circle of the Evolutionary Leaders to provide an emergent, cosmological, planetary, interspiritual and societal foundation to serve and support the conscious evolution of humanity and to heal our collective mindset from the illusion of separation to a perspective of unity in diversity. Our hitherto collective mindset has driven a world of otherness and where conflict and inequalities are, it seems, inevitable choices and consequences. Instead, an evidence-grounded perception of the unified nature of reality and its unitive narrative invites us to inwardly hear the wisdom of our hearts and respect the complementarity of feminine and masculine attributes and the wholeness of both the inner being and outer doing in our lives, individually and communally as a planetary species. It empowers us to envision and gives us authentic hope to co-create a love-based rather than separation-based future, where rather than conflict and exclusion, peace and unitive justice are natural behaviors, choices, and outcomes for a world that works for everyone, and including our planetary home, Gaia. The Thought Leaders' unitive narrative also takes inspiration from philosopher Teilhard de Chardin, who realized as the guns fell silent after the First World War that someday we shall harness the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, humanity will have discovered fire. That someday is here and now. As we wake up to the radical reality of a unitive narrative and its unity-based science of love, we will also discover as a species, and perhaps for the first time, who we really are and who we can evolve to become.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Jude Currivan, so moving. Our next guest presentation is from Dr. Jonathan Granoff, which you'll see is from the context of an earlier Zoom assemblage that all of our guests here attended, and from which we've created this commentary clip by Dr. Granoff. Dr. Granoff is the founder of the Global Security Institute, also well known as the regular convener of our world's Nobel Peace Laureates, and one of the world's most well-known activists with regard to nuclear proliferation. You can find out much more about Dr. Granoff at gsinstitute.org. That's gsinstitute.org. So we can go ahead now and share that video.
The Anthropocene begins several hundred years ago when the human community's relationship to the natural world became dominated by a worldview of domination and duality. Those of us in this community understand that, in fact, we are completely part of the fabric of the natural world, and we're part of the fabric of the source of the natural world, which is infinite, beautiful, formless, perfect. As Jesus described it, love, and Muhammad described it as compassion, and the Buddha similarly. So the worldview that we start with is one that's holistic. The worldview that the major institutions that we're addressing begins with is atomized. And that atomized mechanical worldview was entirely dysfunctional in the 17th century, leading to the religious wars in Europe, which were resolved by the political institution of the state, which was created, the modern state was created in 1648 at Westphalia. The primary pillars of that institution of the state and how security is defined is sovereignty and borders, and the expression of which, the protection of which, is done primarily by military nationalism. That paradigm reached horrific proportions in the catastrophes of the scourge of war in the 20th century, out of which emerged a compromise solution, a paradigm of unity and recognition of the core pillars of sovereignty and military nationalism in the United Nations system. The United Nations system is both for the peoples of the world, but the ultimate power, which is where the monopoly of the use of force resides, is with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council: France, the United Kingdom, China, Russia, and the United States. And any one of those countries are capable of jamming the system. And that's precisely where we are at the moment. The institution set up to address the catastrophe of war is now unable to functionally address it. So we're in a time of enormous chaos, and we're in a time, I would say, parallel to the 17th century in which ideas and worldviews are truly transformative and matter. So the question is, what is the transformative unifying principle that can be the North Star coming out of this chaos? What have we learned today that we didn't know in the 17th century in terms of keeping peace amongst people? Well, one of the things we've learned is the paradox that modern science and technology is such that the more the weapons that we have are perfected, the less security we obtain. That's most aptly expressed with nuclear weapons, but there are many other weapons in a similar category. The second thing we've learned is that there's a set of existential threats that, unlike any other time in history, impact every single person on the planet and can only be with a cooperative, legally founded system based on science, our relationship to the natural world, and the universality of the intrinsic dignity of the individual and the sacredness of the person embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So that change that we know has to take place is taking place. It's just how fast is it going to take place is the question. And how is it described by the nations of the world? And how can we, in a sense, be a catalyst, a stimulus for the transformation to a more holistic, responsible global community? Well, I'm pleased to share that the United Nations Human Security Trust, and people hardly even know about this, this is why they come to some of us in civil society, has identified several General Assembly resolutions calling for the utilization of the concept of human security rather than the main paradigm of the security of the state being the main focus. And human security relates to the way people actually live. And of course, there is no human security without security in the fabric of the web of life. We depend on the ants, we depend on the bees, and so forth. And human security addresses the threats that transcend borders, and in a sense, oddly enough, force us to come together. Pandemics, the climate, the health of the oceans, which provide 50 to 70% of our oxygen, rainforests, and even some of the institutions that we've created, the global financial system, which is needed to address poverty. That all of these threats are all better understood from a perspective of the unity of the human family, rather than in the atomized perspective of the nation state, or the religions, or the tribes, or the peoples, or the language groupings, or the cultural groupings. So within that, there's different paradigms of how that's expressed. The Chinese, for example, which is a large part of the world's population, place an enormous emphasis on efficiency, with very little emphasis on the sacredness and importance of the individual, and thus human rights are diminished. The Western countries that most of us are part of place an enormous intellectual value on the importance of individual freedom and liberty and individual expression. And yet our institutions are in debate about that. So we're in a time of enormous chaos. So I'm pleased to share that the United Nations reached out to civil society, and particularly the World Academy of Arts and Science and the Global Security Institute, where I serve in both of these institutions, to mainstream human security. Simultaneously and independently of the portion of the UN that reached out to us, UNDP, the United Nations Program for Development, put out a terrific document called Threats to Human Security in the Anthropocene, a Call for Greater Solidarity. And they analyzed the situation pretty much the same way that I have, without the deeper philosophical underpinnings. So the World Academy of Arts and Science and the UN are completing a contract, the purpose of which is to mainstream human security. And it's my belief that this is a perfect galvanizing principle around which all of us can gather, because it is the long-term North Star that is lacking, that is inarguably better than the current fundamental focus on military nationalism as the pursuit of security. It does not degrade the importance of the nation state any more than a nation state degrades the importance of a city. We are citizens of cities, we're citizens of counties, we're citizens of states, we're citizens of the United States or Mexico or France or Russia. There's different districts. But today we need an approach to the security of the planet and the person that has a global foundation. And that now, the only debate that I've been engaged in several events around this theme, one with the Oxford Union's Debating Society with Jane Goodall and myself, that I would commend anyone to watch to hear it sort of fleshed out. And there was a session that I did with Governor Jerry Brown on it. And Governor Brown said that we should call it planetary realism. Well, there's some degree of, I resonate with that, but the train has left the station because the nations of the world have already agreed on the use of the term human security. So we must first respond with the values that bring us together in the community that we're part of, grounded in the acceptance of the infinite mystery and wonder and grace that gives us life itself. But we also have to have a practical way forward. And the North Star out of the dilemma, I believe, is promoting human security. Of course, we have to stand up to the challenge to the current inadequate fabric. Doesn't have to be totally torn apart, but the challenge to the international norms of the rule of law, the challenge of the violations of international humanitarian law, the criminal acts of a war of aggression, etc. But there's plenty of people doing that. What does our community have to offer? We can help clarify the integrating principles that can provide the North Star route out of the dilemma for the future, because we actually believe in the power of the spirit and the power of ideas. Now, when Thomas Jefferson said all men are created equal, at the time, that did not include women. It did not include any people of color, indigenous people, or even white males without property. But it has become a guiding principle of the legitimacy of all states since then. Even tyrants pay a hypocritic value to it. It is the power of ought. Governance ought to represent the people being governed. That's become an accepted principle. But when it was stated it was an ought, very far from being realized, it itself is being challenged. But human security is premised on the equality of all people, and it is the articulation of that ought for today. And thus, I think this could be a really important galvanizing way of expressing how we interpret the transformation of consciousness, heart, and values into practical application in a world still governed largely by nation states. And it is the nation states right now and the ideology of separation of peoples that is the problem. It's the problem within ourselves. And the great Sufi master Baba Muhammad said, separate from yourself that which separates you from others. It's on so many levels, of course. There's so much in that. It's not just our national or racial or gender identities that separate us from the unity of the light of the soul, but it is anger, falsehood, jealousy, pride. These are the things that separate us from ourselves and one another. But first and foremost is the perversion of national identity used in the service of violence. And that's what we're facing today. And there's no time to lose for us to be the examples of the peace that we know can be seen, that comes in the eyes of every baby that's born. and that we know resonates in the heart of every human being.
Yeah, so Jonathan, thank you. And before I go on pause here, I just want to say that the reason that we're gathered here and the reason that many of you will be hearing this audio is that we're really assessing as an evolutionary leaders community and across the 15 or more synergy circles of the evolutionary leaders, all of whom have been deep into their planning for their 2022 agenda, how we can actually vigorously insert this new issue that's arisen from the Russia-Ukraine war in the wider context that Jonathan just talked about. So our tasking is going to be across all of our circles and activities to see how we can bring this issue across as many voices as possible through our community, where we know we have tremendous amount of media assets. So I'm going to go on pause now, and that way this group can revert to its discussion.
Kurt, one other thing, this community has something that's unique, which is lots of people that are creative, and creativity is unpredictable. And the model we're facing is one of domination, which is all about predictability. So I'm reaching out as, because I'm working with the UN on this subject, reaching out to our community to help mainstream human security, and to bring the creative juices, spirit, wonder, mystery of creativity to the expression to the world. Imagine if children were educated in the truths that we are one human family, that the environment is one, and that our political institutions have to be grounded in that reality. The necessity of the creative community to find ways of stimulating and galvanizing and catalyzing that spirit of unity, I think, is the task at so many levels that is before us. That's the healing that will take place.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so thank you so much, Jonathan Granoff, and all those who attended that previous assemblage from which we took that clip. Those are just such important comments. So we're going to continue now with a presentation video from the author of Global Unitive Healing, Dr. Elena Mustakova, which has been placed here in the sequence since Dr. Mustakova refers often to the commentary that you just heard from Dr. Jonathan Granoff. Dr. Mustakova brings to her book a rich background as a spiritual philosopher, evolutionary psychologist, social scientist, and member of the Evolutionary Leaders United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Thought Leaders Circle as well. She's an expert on the systemic links between individual health, culture, moral development, language, and our collective social health. And her scholarship on the evolution of moral consciousness and her social justice activism within communities has received wide academic recognitions. Among her many publications, she's the senior editor of a comprehensive volume entitled Toward a Socially Responsible Psychology for a Global Era. And her clinical practice redefines healing in this global context for the 21st century. So you can find out much more about Dr. Mustakova at elenamustakova.net. So John, let's go over now to that video.
Consciousness evolves towards an increasingly comprehensive understanding of justice and oneness. This evolution is a dialectic between individual and collective, not simply the sum total of individual evolution. Therefore, as we work toward the evolution of consciousness, it is essential to engage the socio-historical structures that scaffold it. As a great number of people develop a more comprehensive perspective, they lead the way to the creation of new forms of social organization that uphold a more comprehensive understanding of justice. In this way, as socio-historical contexts evolve, they become the containers that scaffold the evolution of collective understanding. With this dialectic in mind, let us look at where we are collectively now. We find ourselves in a massive worldwide awakening to our spiritual reality of interdependence and a growing push towards peaceful governance that reflects and protects that. The call that people of conscience are raising is not just the eternal human longing for peace. It is a very concrete call for governance that protects human security, honors the sanctity of life, and stewards the planet. This is, in effect, a push to the next level of human social organization that can scaffold the path to universal peace. This is our biggest challenge right now, to lead the way and to mobilize all available resources to create the next level of evolutionary global governance. What does that mean? Historically, until now, the power of force has been used to dominate over others. Even as humanity has evolved its understanding of human rights and has advanced greatly in the creation of more just and comprehensive laws, power is still understood as the power to dominate. The history of the gradual creation of the United Nations, conceived as a broad-based and effective system of international security since 1942, itself illustrates how the original bold vision to create an international entity based on federalist principles became hijacked to the interests of sovereign powers. The more ambitious vision of a global order based on international cooperation was reduced at the October 1943 conference in Moscow to what was viewed as a politically feasible and largely harmless organization through the creation of the Security Council veto. Nonetheless, an effort was made to embed within the UN Charter clauses that would allow, at least in theory, for the future strengthening of mechanisms of international cooperation, as circumstances evolved further toward a global vision of world order. 80 years later, as Putin's war in Ukraine and the response of the West have escalated into a confrontation of global powers, it is abundantly clear that the current historical moment calls on us to raise again the vision of a global federalist order and to educate people that it is the only path to justice and security for all. The shift now needed is to radically redefine the use of power. In other words, to create a vehicle to use the power of force only for the right reason, to protect against the rise of dictators who threaten unitive justice and global security. Such a global entity with the power to protect humanity and the planet would represent the next stage in the progressive evolution of collective consciousness and would scaffold the developing understanding of what it means to live in peace, something humanity has no experience with and will have to grow into gradually. In the face of Putin, we have a clear example of what happens when there is no viable international mechanism to stop the rise of bloodthirsty dictators before their grip on power has solidified. Most in his close circle recognize the madness of his war in Ukraine, as more and more reports reveal, but they are powerless to stop him now. And as some of them have declared, they are forced to keep going in silence all the way to The Hague. Collective global security requires the world to be prepared for such circumstances because human nature is capable of extreme evil, and it may be centuries of collective life in global peace before we fully transcend the likelihood of the rise of ruthless dictators. Unitive justice cannot be treated at this time solely as an intellectual ideal. It must be upheld in concrete, practical, and urgent ways. The world must have an entity, a reformed United Nations, capable of protecting ordinary people from being at the mercy of warlords, as millions of Russians are now. Only when the creation and full empowerment of such an entity has been accomplished will people have the socio-historical conditions necessary for the further evolution of consciousness. That was the evolutionary spiritual vision, clearly articulated by Baha'u'llah in the mid-19th century. The transformation of consciousness toward realizing the unity of the human family. To conclude, in asking for the creation of this synergy circle, my vision from the very beginning has been that we unite our individual experience and networks of resources into an in-depth consultation on how we can most effectively support the socio-historical evolutionary process toward unity of justice and global security through broad educational efforts. Humanity is still steeped in a 17th century frame of reference that emphasizes national sovereignty, borders, and nationalist militarism. There is a lot to be done to articulate for people what unity of justice may look like amidst our existential climate and political crises, why it requires a federalist international structure, and how this structure can gradually and effectively subsume the task of the protection of peace and planetary life through a global military force, freeing humanity from military competition in the creation of ever more sophisticated weapons of destruction. To answer the question eloquently articulated by Jonathan Granoff, what is the transformative unifying principle that can be the North Star coming out of the current chaos? As his work clearly articulates, we must educate people toward an understanding of human security rather than national security as the condition for unity of justice. We must also articulate the integrative spiritual principles that underlie unity of justice and human security, and that must become embedded in education on every level. It is no doubt a very complex leap forward that is required of humanity. And it is our challenge to keep articulating a feasible and practical path forward and to become catalysts of this leap.
Well, thank you again so much, Dr. Mustakova, for those further comments. Now, our next and final guest is Dr. Scott Alan Carlin of New York's Long Island University. And he joins us not only from the Unity of Justice and Global Security Synergy Circle of the Evolutionary Leaders, but also as a core member of the Evolutionary Leaders United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Thought Leaders Circle as well. And you can find out more about all of them and Dr. Carlin at sdgthoughtleadercircle.org. That's sdgthoughtleadercircle.org. Dr. Carlin's commentary is a great summary on the breadth of this landscape that's being addressed here and confronts our world today. And so we've placed it here in conclusion. So John, we can share that video now.
At this moment, when climate change and a global pandemic urge us to work together more effectively, it seems the opposite is happening in countries around the world. Must we live in a nuclear-armed Hobbesian world defined by competition? Why is the political power of governments built upon divide and conquer oppositional frames? Furthermore, we are caught inside complex paradoxes. As we materially improve, planetary ecology declines. Our cultural narratives no longer seem to bind us together. They fragment us and accelerate opportunities for cultural and ecological breakdown. Economic growth can no longer solve our core problems because economic growth is the problem. The solution is to generate new narratives and opportunities for social, economic, and ecological justice, grounded in respect and reverence for people and nature. We're not facing the end of prosperity, but its redefinition. How can a unitive narrative help guide human security? The unitive narrative builds upon well-established scientific understandings of the world and varied interfaith and indigenous cultural practices that span the globe. A unitive narrative does not collapse cultural diversity, it embraces cultural diversity and expands opportunities for individual and cultural agency. When science and industry improve human health, human rights, and ecology, they strengthen their contributions to this unitive narrative. Sustainable and regenerative models of development can be our future, but this cannot be done within the prevailing capitalist model that concentrates wealth and income and fails to protect the living systems of the earth. Earlier this year, the UN Development Program, UNDP, published new threats to human security in the Anthropocene, demanding greater solidarity. UNDP notes that military spending shows no signs of abating. Instead of a peace dividend, we confront a world with violent conflict, afflicting more than 1 billion people. The report also notes that poverty and hunger are greater than just 5 years ago, and a generation-wide education crisis will have long-lasting consequences. So what can be done? The UNDP report argues that the Anthropocene requires a redefinition of human security. The threats we face in the 21st century are fundamentally different than any time in human history. Security is no longer a zero-sum game. Security is enhanced by our collective resiliency and our collective capacity to create societies of ecological abundance. In the context of COVID-19, UNDP supports universal healthcare as a strategy that advances human security through protection, empowerment, and solidarity, linked to the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its aspiration to leave no one behind. But why stop there? I read the unitive narrative as inviting us to widen our models of health to include environmental health and specific strategies such as toxic use reduction as integral to health care. How else can a unitive narrative improve upon the work of the UNDP? We must build human security on a foundation of love. Decades ago, the environmentalist Aldo Leopold cautioned that environmental protection cannot be managed solely from regulatory models. It must come from a love of the land, what Leopold called a land ethic. He contrasted this with the role of the conqueror and their preoccupation with economic outputs. The unitive narrative affirms a path outlined by Rogers and Narain in Something Beyond Greatness. Love is what makes a systemic vision possible. When our thinking negates love, it negates systemic vision. Linear thinking narrows the vision. When our vision narrows, the actions we take wreak havoc on the coherent interlacing of the systemic existence of human beings and the biosphere that supports life. We know we are acting in alignment with our natural nature because of the joy and happiness, the intoxication we feel at the time. Love is the foundation of human coexistence, they write. The lack of universal healthcare has many causes. As a product of scarcity-based resource models, it reflects individualistic cultural models, but also reflects a narrowing of vision. The unitive narrative is an invitation to widen the list of expert stakeholders that have traditionally made government and institutional policies. This is a moment to awaken to new possibilities of human solidarity, systems thinking, and love. Love won't impede our intellectual horizons, it expands our horizons. The next several decades are going to be fraught with challenges, but we can lessen the burden by bringing laws and institutional practices back into alignment with modern science and the ecological realities of life. The equitable sharing of the Earth's resources is not utopian thinking, it is our destiny. As the UNDP report states, it's imperative to go beyond fragmented efforts to reaffirm the principles of the founding documents of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the UN Charter, which are also central ideas underpinning the concept of human security. Echoing the UN Secretary General's Our Common Agenda, doing so in the Anthropocene implies a systemic, permanent, and universal attention to solidarity, not as optional charity or something that subsumes the individual to the interests of the collective, but as a call to pursue human security through, quote unquote, the eyes of humankind. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Scott Alan Carlin. And before you, Dr. Mustakova, Dr. Jonathan Granoff, Dr. Jude Currivan, and Audrey Kitagawa. And thank you so much, John Raymer from the Sign Network, for shepherding these video presentations. Obviously, this is such a crucial and important, challenging landscape that confronts our lives today in real time. So as we leave our listeners with all of this content, we want to ask both Dr. Atkinson and Dr. Mustakova to just leave us with a few more concluding remarks. So we're going to start first with Dr. Atkinson. So Bob, what would you want to leave our viewers with within the context of all of this important content that has just been shared in these videos?
Thanks, Kurt. In light of all that we've just heard, I would like to offer a perspective on unitive justice from my 2017 Nautilus Award-winning book, The Story of Our Time. A universal system of global justice, which is really what we're talking about, is a prerequisite for the realization of world peace. Such a system has to be built upon a standard of equity and fairness for the entire human family, as many have said. And as understood by the world's sacred traditions, justice is the embodiment of divine order on earth. Justice finds its fulfillment in a standard of unconditional love. It prepares the way for unity, leads to the well-being of humanity, and carries a power that can transform society. Justice is the unifying force expressed in every dimension of reality. The Baha'i writings affirm this, saying, "Justice is a powerful force. It is the standard bearer of love and bounty. The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men." That is the promise of justice, to bring about unity. Are we close to achieving that? Even though our understanding of justice and our capacity to carry it out has expanded with every social advance we've taken, as our circles of unity have become wider and wider, the punitive system of justice we've lived by for so many centuries has not allowed us to experience the fullest effects of our growing circles of unity. The eye for an eye and a life for a life system of justice has led to the extremes of unbridled genocide and war, which have created the need for restorative justice, another step adding generations to the process of achieving true justice. This is where indigenous cultures can serve as a model that can be writ large. Theirs is a system of unitive justice, which the world community desperately needs now. They have a built-in system of restorative justice that simultaneously offers meaningful support to victims and helps perpetrators restore community harmony. Because our consciousness has evolved to a level of maturity, the world community desperately needs a global system of unitive justice, designed explicitly to maintain unity on all levels. This would be built upon the standard of compassion, respect, equity for all human beings, with the ability to restore harmony built right into the system. Love and justice combined results in unity right away, rather than needing more energy later on to restore another injustice. Unitive justice is the greatest need of our time because world unity is necessary for our very survival. The fate of humanity in the 21st century depends upon the twin forces of love and justice, bringing about equitable relationships on all levels. A global system of unitive justice would take into account the hidden wholeness of all existence. As the declaration of the 1993 Parliament of the World's Religions made clear, We must strive for a social and economic order. Let no one be deceived. There is no global justice without truthfulness and humanness. Yet to this, we have to add, there can be no global justice without the recognition of the oneness of humanity. Carrying out global justice today based on oneness and interdependence is the only thing that will ensure the achievement of the purpose of justice, establishing unity in diversity, the most practical need of our time. The complete transformation of the world depends upon this balanced and inclusive formulation of justice in the world. Only a fully functioning global system of unitive justice can reshape and prepare communities worldwide for effective global security, as this is the purest reflection of absolute unity that is possible on this earth.
So thank you so much, Dr. Robert Atkinson. And now finally, to leave us with some concluding remarks, Dr. Elena Mustakova, as author of Global Unitive Healing, what would you like to leave our viewers with as we conclude?
Well, we have heard a lot of very thoughtful evidence on the necessity of unitive justice and human security as the deepest understanding of global security at this time. What I would like listeners to take away from this is that such unitive justice and global security are not just possible, but they are actually the most practical approach right now. It's the approach that leaves nobody behind, which is why it is a form of planetary realism, to quote an earlier comment. So we do have to stop swimming at this time, all of us, unconsciously in a public language and discourse of antagonism and disconnect. We do have to move from narcissistic ego battles to conscious collective effort towards a kinder and more thoughtful way to bring justice and accountability through collective processes of a new kind. And we are all agents in this process. These are not large ideas for large organizations. These are the most practical things in front of every person right now. An example of collective processes of a new kind is the use of language that reflects our spiritual, ecological, and social interdependence, as opposed to the divisive language we hear now. We also have to come to understand that justice for one group will not be sustainable if it is based on injustice for another. So really, justice can only be unitive. Then there's the issue of climate justice. And then there's the issue of economic and planetary justice. And recently we've seen wonderful and practical proposals for global systems accounting that keeps track of relevant currencies like carbon, biodiversity, pollution, human wellness, rather than governance just founded on the wrong assumption. People are working to create legal pathways to call out ecocide. All of these are forms of work that ordinary people are carrying out towards unitive justice and global security. So this circle welcomes all to contribute to changing the collective climate and to meeting the challenges and imperative of collective action. It is our opportunity, every one of us right now, to build a sense of global community around issues that matter to everyone: justice and security. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Elena Mustakova and Dr. Robert Atkinson. And thanks so much, and a huge congratulations to you, Dr. Mustakova, as author, and to the entire team at Light on Light Press for this Nautilus Award for your book, Global Unitive Healing. And a big thanks to Audrey Kitagawa, Jude Currivan, Jonathan Granoff, and Scott Alan Carlin who have joined us with their video contributions today. Let's hope that this work can be a part of a meaningful response to these and so many other challenging aspects of the time in which we live. And with regard to that, and just in the final closing, the Evolutionary Leaders Circle also invites all of you to enjoy 2 current specials that we're hosting on Voice America that are available 24/7 on demand. Both are easily accessed online by simply Googling the Convergence at Voice America. That's the Convergence at Voice America. And the programs are entitled Humanity's Moment of Choice, Choosing Earth, which is live now, and Humanity's Moment of Choice, Voices for a Thriving Future, which will be posting on or about June 1st. And these programs include many luminaries that all of you know well, such as Deepak Chopra, Dwayne Elgin, Bruce Lipton, Jude Currivan, Eben Alexander, and many, many more from the Global Evolutionary Leaders Circle. And also we invite you to check out the upcoming program, World Unity Week, which is an exciting program that John here and all of his comrades at SIGN are a part of producing each year with Unity Earth and the SIGN Network. So check that out at worldunityweek.org. And John, would you like to say a few words about World Unity Week as we close?
Yeah. No, I would, because my gosh, anybody who's listened to this, you've heard a lot. Phrases like complete transformation of the world. We're at a serious moment. This is a moment of choice, and changing our thinking, which leads to changing our speaking, which leads to changing our doing, and our actions in the world need to happen. So how are we really going to do this? Now, the SIGN Alliance are social innovators that are committed to behavior change at scale through collaborative learning and innovation and unprecedented unified action. And World Unity Week is one example of that. It's a chance for us to use this new medium that we've found to be able to not just be passive listeners any longer, but to actually show up and be present and connect with each other, to do the work we need to do, to actually mobilize toward loving kindness and compassion like Audrey talked about. And there are examples where we are taking it by the hand and reconfiguring to build the structures that we're talking about here. So there are projects that we call synergy projects that are happening during World Unity Week, which starts on June 18th and goes through the 25th. It's an 8-day week like the Beatles. But then it also launches a 99-day arc of Peace Through Unity, which will end in September. The International Day of Peace is the 21st. That's in the middle of the week, so we're going all the way to the end of that week to include Peace Week, starting with World Unity Week and those 99 days of Peace Through Unity. Including is an example of how we team up to build the House of Hope. World Refugee Day is happening during that period of time. Here's an example where people are coming together to turn this building that's in Auschwitz into a house of hope for refugees that are coming from Ukraine. I mean, we're talking about us being able to connect with each other, practical expressions of what this new world really is going to look like. It was overwhelming for me to listen to all the wisdom I heard here. This is treasured knowledge. But shame on us if we don't actually allow it to change the way we behave. Things aren't going to be different unless we do them differently. And World Unity Week is a chance to online come together, to actually meet up with each other, learn about each other, find out about the projects that are happening. Let us hear about your project, what you're up to, and let's actually start to turn what we have into what we need to make this great transformation occur. So I'm so grateful to you, Kurt, for your leadership. And Elena, congratulations for you on this amazing book. You know how it touched me when I read it. I said, oh my God, this is a path. This is a way to unity. Thank you, Bob, for your steadfast, your counsel and coaching of Elena in the process and the work you're doing with Light on Light. I mean, this is our moment. And I'm honored and privileged to be here in service of such a beautiful expression of where we need to go. Now I got to really do it. So it's strategic, tactical, operational, the whole levels. We got to actually start to live the way we're talking about. I'm in. I know you are too. So Meet you there.
Yeah, John, thank you so much. And thanks finally then one last time to all of our guests who were so generous. And thanks to you, our audience, from all of us. And let's continue that work together, as John just said, for that world that works for all. Because as all of us said today, we know that this is the world that we truly want to see, and we can make it happen.